Let's face it, some Pokemon are just bad. However, it doesn't always have to be that way. Even if a Pokemon sucks, there are a number of different ways to make them better, and one of those is by giving them amazingly cool evolutions, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing in this video for some of the less popular Pokemon out there. I'm going to start things off with the Pokemon that more or less inspired this video, and that is Squawkabilly. In terms of fan perception, most people feel like Squawkabilly is a lame, do-nothing Pokemon that just takes up a slot in the Pokedex. And while I personally don't feel that strongly, I can definitely see where people are coming from. However, I have come up with an evolution for Squawkabilly that I think would completely change how everyone thinks about it, and actually make it into a really cool Pokemon. In fact, I actually came up with not one, but 4 evolutions for Squawkabilly. So without further ado, I would like you to meet Squawkstar. This Pokemon is all about giving a major glow up to every single part of Squawkabilly's design. First, since people kind of look at Squawkabilly as a boring Pokemon, I wanted to give some flash to its evolution, and luckily it is perfectly suited for flash thanks to its inspiration. As its name would imply, Squawkabilly is based on a rockabilly. So, as its evolution's name would also imply, Squawkstar is based on a full-blown rock star. So, the flash element of this Pokemon is certainly accounted for with that, but it doesn't stop there, because another thing Squawkabilly has going for it are its 4 different forms. Most people acknowledge that this is neat, but again, most also think that it's kind of boring since the different forms don't really do anything. So I set out to change this with Squawkstar, and basing this Pokemon on a rock star turned out to be the best way to fix it, because I also had the idea of making Squawkabilly's 4 different forms into a rock band with its evolution, with each form comprising a different member of the band. The standard green form becomes the lead singer upon evolving, and is now known as Squawkstar's vocal plumage. The blue form becomes the drummer, and is known as the snare plumage. The yellow form becomes the guitarist, and is known as the riff plumage, and the gray form becomes the bassist, and is known as the bass plumage. To add even more value to these forms, their designs were also made slightly different to one another in order to individualize them, so it's no longer just a matter of it being the same Pokemon with just a different color. Furthermore, in order to give these forms even more value on top of that, and more value to the Pokemon as a whole, each form of Squawkstar also gains a different new type that reflects the Rockstar element, and their respective role in the band. So, as the energetic leader of the band, the vocal plumage of Squawkstar becomes a fighting flying type. As the one who plays the electric guitar, the riff plumage becomes electric flying type. The snare plumage, as the drummer, becomes rock flying type, making for a bit of a pun as well, and finally, the bass plumage becomes steel flying type. So now, not only do each of these forms have individual value, but they have individual value in terms of concept, design, and even their typing, which I feel addresses the issues that many have with Squawkabilly, and it does so in a way that also keeps the evolutions cohesive to one another and perfectly plays on the origins of the Pokemon. So I think this would be a perfect way to make Squawkabilly better, and would be an amazing evolution for it to have. We've still got some more Pokemon to cover in this video though, so now we're gonna look at a Pokemon that are kinda different forms of each other, and that is Volbeat and Illumise. While they are different Pokemon, they are also essentially male and female forms of each other, and since they're not really that great in any way, I thought that they would make for a good candidate for a awesome evolution, and not just any evolution, an evolution into different forms of the same Pokemon. This is Lucicada, the evolved form of both Volbeat and Illumise, with the form that you get depending on its pre-evolution. If evolved from Volbeat, you naturally would get the male form, and you get the female form if you evolve it from Illumise. This kind of evolution has never been done officially to this point, and I think it sounds like a pretty interesting concept. So giving it to a Pokemon like these two that already desperately need some shine anyway, I think would be a great way to help make these Pokemon relevant, especially since it fits so well with their concept. There's nothing super crazy going on with their origins or their concept or anything, as these are just a pretty straightforward extension of Volbeat and Illumise, but one thing that they do have is an added typing. Both forms of Lucicada are Bug Fire type, due to Volbeat and Illumise's origins as Firefly Pokemon. Again, since the goal here was to make these Pokemon as cool and as relevant as possible, and with the Fire type making a ton of natural sense, this felt like another great way to really add to this evolution and make it the proper glow-up that these Pokemon deserve. I also really like the name Lucicada because it sounds nice in my opinion and follows the light theme of Volbeat and Illumise's names. But I will say that I do realize that this Pokemon isn't exactly a cicada either, as we've just discussed. So call that a little bit of artistic liberty, if you will, because otherwise I think the names sound pretty cool. And overall, this could just be a cool way, in my opinion, to help these Pokemon out who are otherwise not the best to become just a little bit more appealing. Next, we're going to look at a Pokemon who has long been forgotten, overlooked, and otherwise just not enjoyed, and that is Chatot. This Pokemon was a big deal when it debuted in Gen 4 because it was one of the first Sinnoh Pokemon ever revealed. It was literally used to market that generation prior to its release, and with its signature Chatter move, it had a mechanic that was entirely unique and exclusive to itself. However, since that move had to be effectively gutted and swept under the rug due to its audio recording capabilities allowing for some less than optimal language to be used in the games, Chatot basically lost all of its uniqueness and utility in one fell swoop, resulting in it basically being swept under the rug in its entirety. So, since it can no longer claim the unique traits and features that it was designed around, why not give it a cool evolution to help give it some new life? This is Metronaut, a Chatot evolution that could hopefully help make it a little more relevant. Thanks to its musical inspirations, Metronaut becomes a fairy flying type upon evolution, which is one way that I think this evolution could be a breath of fresh air for the Pokemon. Since it continues all of this music-based inspiration from Chatot, it is also based around a conductor, which seemed fitting for the lead Pokemon of this evolutionary line, since conductors obviously lead the orchestras that they are conducting. Another thing that I think would also be cool to do for this Pokemon is to give it a signature ability as well, and one that more or less tries to capture what Chatter was trying to do before it had to be dealt with. Chatter is a move that deals damage and also causes confusion, so as a nod to this, I decided to give Metronaut a new ability called Musician. This ability would give all sound-based moves used by Metronaut a 50% chance to confuse the opponent. In addition to all of the other features of this Pokemon, I feel like this would allow it to potentially gain the role of a pest in battle, and someone that you could use to disrupt your opponent's strategies and throw them out of whack a little bit, which could hopefully give it at least a little in-battle viability, while also providing Chatot some spotlight that it desperately needs, while also providing a nod to its legacy all at the same time. For this next Pokemon, we are going to stay in the Sinnoh region and talk about what many say is one of the most forgettable Pokemon ever, and that is Lumineon. Now, personally, I really like both Finneon and Lumineon, so I don't really agree with the slander at all, but there's no denying that by and large, this Pokemon isn't really liked that much. So I attempted to change the narrative on that a little bit with Resenion. With this evolution, I obviously wanted to make these Pokemon cooler, more relevant, etc., but there was one thing in particular that I really wanted to do with a Lumineon evolution specifically. Even though I do like the Pokemon, as I said, I do think that it's a bit of a flaw that it's known as the Neon Pokemon. It has neon in its name, yet there isn't really anything that's too bright or colorful about its design at all, like you might expect. It's not exactly dull per se, but it's definitely not bright and what you would expect with neon being such a focus of its design. So with Resenion, I actually tried to capture that concept, because I felt like that was the key to making this Pokemon cool. As a result, its design is way more bright and colorful, and additionally, it also gains the electric type to become water electric, in going along with the neon theme. I feel like these two elements are exactly what this family of Pokemon need to change their perception, and they're honestly just right there waiting to be taken advantage of. Evolution-wise, Lumineon is just a great candidate to get a evolution in general, because in addition to its reputation, it's also just got the build of a Pokemon that could get a new evolution. It's a two-stage line, Lumineon itself isn't particularly big or complex or powerful, so overall there is plenty of room for it to grow, and I think that would totally change the perception of this Pokemon if it did evolve, and if it evolved into something like this. For good measure, Resenion's name comes from fluorescent, as in fluorescent lights, and I think something in this vein would just be amazing to see in a future Pokemon game, and would do a lot for the Lumineon line. You will have to let me know your favorite of this bunch in the comments below though, and be sure to leave a like on the video as well if you enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching this video as always. I will be back with another video very soon as well, and until then, as always, I will smell you guys later.